He was the face of Doritos and one of America's most beloved comedians. Then, in 1973, Avery Schreiber vanished from the spotlight. What happened next shocked everyone. A failed variety show, a bitter falling out with his comedy partner, and a secret battle that almost killed him. Now, the truth about his disappearance is finally coming out, and it's darker than anyone imagined. Avery Schreiber was born on April 9, 1935, in Chicago, Illinois. His father worked as a laborer, and his mother was a secretary. They didn't have much, but they taught him the value of hard work. Chicago was full of life. Theaters, music, and comedy clubs filled the city with energy. That world fascinated Avery from a young age. He was always the funny kid, the one who could turn an ordinary moment into something special. His humor wasn't just about telling jokes. It was in the way he moved, the way he reacted, the way he made people feel like they were part of something. He loved making people laugh. It felt natural. It felt right. At 17, he made a decision that would change everything. He enlisted in the U.S. Army. It was a practical choice, something many young men did at the time. But something unexpected happened. He entered the all-Army talent show, not thinking much of it. When he stepped on stage, everything clicked. The laughter, the applause, the energy of the crowd, it was electric. That moment lit a fire inside him. He knew what he wanted to do. When he returned home, he didn't waste time. He enrolled at the Goodman Theater, one of the best acting schools in Chicago. He wanted to learn everything about performing. At night, he took classes at the University of Chicago, making sure he had something to fall back on. It was a lot to juggle, but he was determined. Theater was exciting, but it was improvisation that truly grabbed him. There was something thrilling about creating a scene in real time, bouncing off other actors, keeping the audience on edge. Chicago was becoming the center of improv, and Avery was in the right place at the right time. That's when he found Second City. In 1960, he joined the troupe, and everything changed. Second City wasn't just another comedy group. It was a breeding ground for some of the greatest comedic minds. Every night, they pushed boundaries, experimented with ideas, and performed in front of packed crowds. Second City was more than just a stage for Avery Schreiber. It was a proving ground where he sharpened his skills and found his comedic voice. Over 5 years, he worked alongside some of the most influential figures in improvisational theater, including Del Close and Viola Spolin. Their approach to comedy was groundbreaking, built on spontaneity and collaboration. This environment pushed Schreiber to develop a quick wit and an instinct for timing that would define his career. During his time there, he took part in several notable productions, including Paul Sills' Ovid's Metamorphosis and Story Theater. These weren't just performances. They were lessons in storytelling, character work, and the power of improvisation. Each role forced him to think on his feet, react in the moment, and create something fresh every time he stepped on stage. That adaptability would serve him well in the years to come. But his impact wasn't confined to Chicago. Schreiber was part of a Second City review that toured New York, giving him exposure far beyond his hometown. This was a turning point. It wasn't just about getting laughs in a small theater. It was about reaching a national audience. The experience helped him transition from local talent to a recognized name in comedy, laying the foundation for what came next. Schreiber never forgot his roots. Later in his career, he returned to Second City as a teacher, passing down what he had learned to the next generation. This wasn't just about technique. It was about the philosophy of improv, trusting your instincts, embracing failure, and always saying yes to the moment. That full-circle moment showed just how deeply Second City had shaped him, not just as a performer, but as a mentor. In 1962, Schreiber met Jack Burns at Second City, and that single meeting changed both of their careers. Burns had started as a Boston News anchorman, but he had a knack for comedy. His fast-talking, high-energy delivery was a perfect contrast to Schreiber's more grounded, expressive style. That contrast became their signature. The chemistry between them was instant, but their connection ran deeper than just performing together. Burns would later call Schreiber his dearest friend and comedy partner for 40 years. That bond allowed them to push each other creatively, refine their material, and take risks. Their breakout moment came with the taxi cab routine. Burns played an overly chatty passenger, peppering every sentence with a relentless, while Schreiber played the exhausted cab driver just trying to survive the ride. It was simple but brilliant. Their dynamic was so sharp, so natural, that it quickly became one of their most famous bits. When they performed it on The Tonight Show with Jack Parr in 1964, audiences couldn't get enough. But they didn't stop. stop at sketches. They dove into political satire, tackling serious topics with humor in their album The Watergate Comedy Hour. At a time when political scandals dominated headlines, their sharp, witty take on events struck a chord with audiences. Success wasn't always smooth. By 1968, they felt their act was becoming repetitive, leading to a temporary split. But creative partnerships like theirs don't just fade. In 1972, they reunited, and a year later, they had their own variety show, the Burns and Schreiber Comedy Hour. The show mixed sketches, musical performances, and guest stars, proving they had evolved beyond their early routines while still staying true to their comedic roots. No matter what they did, people always came back to the taxicab routine. It wasn't just a sketch, it was a masterclass in comedic timing. Burns's endless questioning became a running gag, something audiences loved to repeat. Schreiber's escalating frustration made it all the more hilarious. The sketch evolved over time, appearing in different shows and performances, but its core never changed. It was a simple concept executed perfectly. That's why it endured. It wasn't tied to a particular era or reference, it was universal. Beyond its humor, the routine showed how well they worked together. Their timing was precise, their reactions instinctive. They played off each other's strengths, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. It was the kind of comedic partnership that doesn't come along often. Throughout the 1960s, Burns and Schreiber became fixtures on top variety shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, The Dean Martin Show, and The Hollywood Palace. These programs were the peak of entertainment at the time, hosting some of the biggest stars in music and comedy. Appearing on them meant exposure to millions of viewers, and Burns and Schreiber made the most of it. Their performances often played up their contrasting styles, Schreiber as the exasperated straight man, and Burns as the eccentric, unpredictable force of chaos. This balance was key to their appeal. Unlike some comedy duos who stuck to the same routines, Burns and Schreiber adapted to different audiences and formats. Their sketches ranged from broad slapstick to more subtle, character-driven humor. They could bring down the house with their well-rehearsed taxi cab bit, but they could also improvise based on current events, making their comedy feel fresh and relevant. Whether they were appearing on the structured format of The Ed Sullivan Show or the looser, more playful Dean Martin Show, they always found a way to connect with audiences. By the 1970s, Burns and Schreiber took their talents beyond television and into comedy albums. One of their most notable releases was The Watergate Comedy Hour, which tackled the biggest political scandal of the decade with biting satire. This album, released on Little David Records, featured a mix of sketches that poked fun at the Watergate affair, lampooning everyone from Richard Nixon to the journalists covering the scandal. It wasn't just Burns and Schreiber. Other comedians like Bob Ridgely, Frank Welker, and Jack Riley contributed to the album, creating a sharp, multi-layered comedic take on politics. Tracks like The Plan, The Break-In, and Youth Wants to Know broke down the scandal with humor, making complex political issues accessible and entertaining. Schreiber, in particular, had a gift for political satire, something he continued to explore throughout his career. The success of the Watergate Comedy Hour proved that comedy could be more than just entertainment. It could also be a form of commentary, a way to process and critique the world. This album cemented Burns and Schreiber's reputation as more than just variety show comedians. They were sharp, socially aware performers who weren't afraid to take on big issues. A major part of what made their partnership work was their dynamic. People often described their chemistry as a marriage of opposites. Schreiber, with his expressive face and physical comedy, played the reactive straight man. Burns, with his rapid-fire speech and aggressive energy, was the instigator. Their interactions felt natural, as if they were simply amplifying their real personalities for comedic effect. This chemistry had been apparent from their earliest days at Second City, where they had learned the art of playing off each other's strengths. Schreiber's ability to react with just the right mix of frustration and bewilderment made Burns's antics even funnier. Burns, on the other hand, had an unpredictability that kept audiences on edge. You never knew what he was going to do next, and Schreiber's reactions gave those moments structure. Despite their strong partnership, they also allowed each other room to grow individually. Burns went on to work on The Andy Griffith Show, while Schreiber took on roles in projects like My Mother the Car. Even as they explored separate opportunities, they always found their way back to each other, drawn by the undeniable magic of their comedic partnership. partnership. In 1973, Avery Schreiber and Jack Burns finally got their own show. After years of performing together, they launched the Burns and Schreiber Comedy Hour on ABC. This was their chance to bring their unique style of comedy to a wider audience. They had spent years refining their act, starting at Second City in Chicago, where they became known for their sharp improvisation and clever humor. Their new show blended sketch comedy, music, and satire, all delivered with the chemistry that made them such a great team. Schreiber had a warm, teddy bear-like presence, with his signature bushy mustache adding to his charm. Burns was the opposite, quick-witted and sharp-tongued. This contrast had always been the heart of their act. They played off each other perfectly, shifting from slapstick to thoughtful satire with ease. The show allowed them to showcase their full range, moving between broad physical comedy and smart observational humor. Despite their talent, the show struggled. The early 1970s were packed with variety shows, and audiences had plenty of choices. Even with well-known guest stars like Loretta Swit, George Carlin, and Tina Turner, the series failed to find a strong following. Critics loved the intelligent humor, but mainstream viewers didn't connect with it the way the network had hoped. Cecil Smith, a writer for the Los Angeles Times, praised their work. He called their style literate and articulate, something rare for television comedy at the time. But good reviews couldn't save the show. Ratings were everything, and after just one season, the Burns and Schreiber Comedy Hour was canceled. For both comedians, this marked a turning point. They had reunited in the early 70s, hoping to create something fresh. This show was supposed to be their breakthrough. Instead, it became their last major project together. After the cancellation, their careers took different paths. Schreiber found unexpected success in advertising. He became a familiar face in Doritos commercials, playing characters that ranged from chefs to airline pilots. His expressive face and playful delivery made him a natural for ads, and for years, he was one of the most recognizable pitchmen on television. Burns moved behind the scenes, focusing on writing and producing. He played a key role in ABC's Fridays, a sketch comedy show that ran from 1980 to 1982. Though it never reached the popularity of Saturday Night Live, it helped launch the careers of comedians like Michael Richards and Larry David. Burns's influence on comedy remained strong, even if he was no longer in the spotlight. Though they no longer worked together, their friendship never faded. Burns once called Schreiber his dearest friend and comedy partner for 40 years. Their time on the Burns and Schreiber Comedy Hour was short, but their impact on comedy lasted much longer. After parting ways with Jack Burns, Avery Schreiber set out on his own and found success in television. He was no longer part of a comedy duo, but that didn't slow him down. Instead, it gave him the chance to explore different roles and show how much range he really had. In 1975, he appeared on Chico and the Man as the misfortune teller. It was a small role, but it played right into his strengths. He had a way of making eccentric characters feel larger than life, and this was no exception. The following year, he took on something completely different with the Rockford Files. He played a role in the episode Rattler's Class of '63, stepping away from comedy to show he could handle drama just as well. That same year, he also appeared on The Muppet Show. It was a perfect match. His energy fit right in with the wild, unpredictable humor of the Muppets, and he had no trouble keeping up with them. Schreiber kept busy, appearing in one show after another. He had a way of making guest roles stand out, even when he was only on screen for a short time. He also became a regular on game shows, especially Match Game. His quick wit made him a fan favorite. He didn't just answer questions. He turned every moment into entertainment. One of his most memorable roles came in My Mother the Car, a show with one of the strangest plots in TV history. The main character, played by Jerry Van Dyke, buys an old car and discovers it's actually his reincarnated mother. Schreiber played Captain Bernard Mancini, a greedy collector who would stop at nothing to get the car for himself. His character was relentless and a little ridiculous. He was always scheming, always trying to trick his way into owning the car. He also had a habit of mispronouncing the main character's name, turning it into a running joke. The show only lasted one season, but over the years, it became a cult classic. People remembered it not just for the strange premise, but for the performances that made it fun to watch. Schreiber's character was one of the best parts of the show. He took what could have been a simple villain and made him unforgettable. Avery Schreiber became one of the most recognizable faces of the 1970s and 1980s. movies, all because of a bag of Doritos. His series of commercials turned a simple idea into one of the most memorable ad campaigns of the era. Every commercial followed the same pattern. Schreiber played a serious character, a judge, a knight, a grocer, trying to keep control of a situation. Then, someone nearby took a bite of Doritos. The loud crunch threw everything into chaos. No matter how hard he tried to stay in charge, the sound always broke his focus. His frustration built up until he finally gave in and took a bite himself. The ads worked because Schreiber made them work. His wild hair and thick mustache made him instantly recognizable, but it was his reactions that made people laugh. He could go from calm to completely unhinged in a matter of seconds. One moment, he was a dignified British judge. The next, he was losing control as the courtroom fell apart around him. In another ad, he played a billiards champion trying to line up the perfect shot, only to miss completely when the crunching distracted him. One of the funniest commercials put him in the role of a Banana Republic dictator. He stood proudly, in full uniform, awarding a medal to a soldier when the sound of Doritos sent everything into disarray. His uniform tore apart, his medals fell off, and his attempt at control vanished. The campaign lasted for years, with over 40 different versions keeping the joke fresh. No matter how many times people saw Schreiber unravel in frustration, it never stopped being funny. His ability to switch from serious to slapstick made him perfect for the role. He didn't just sell Doritos, he made people look forward to the commercials. Decades later, people still remember the sound of that crunch and the way Schreiber reacted to it. His impact was so strong that when the New York Times wrote about his passing in 2002, they made sure to mention his Doritos commercials as one of the defining moments of his career. Avery Schreiber had a way of stealing the spotlight, even when he wasn't the main star. His film career stretched across decades, filled with roles that played to his strengths as a comedian. In Swashbuckler, 1976, he played Pulaski, a character that brought humor to an action-packed pirate adventure. The film had sword fights, treasure hunts, and daring escapes. With Robert Shaw and James Earl Jones leading the cast, the action never slowed down. Schreiber's job was to break the tension with comedy, and he did exactly that. His expressions alone could turn a simple moment into something funny. The film didn't win over every critic, but it had plenty of charm. A year later, he appeared in the last remake of Beau Geste, 1977, a parody directed by Marty Feldman. This film didn't just poke fun at classic adventure movies, it completely flipped them on their heads. Schreiber played two roles, an Arab chieftain and a used camel salesman. Both were over the top, ridiculous, and exact what the film needed. He had a way of making even the most absurd characters feel natural. He didn't just act in comedies, he understood them. By 1981, he was in Caveman, a film starring Ringo Starr. This prehistoric comedy had almost no real dialogue. The characters spoke in grunts, making physical comedy the main focus. Schreiber played Ock, a caveman who relied entirely on expressions and body language. It was silly, ridiculous, and full of slapstick humor. Some critics didn't know what to make of it, but audiences looking for something goofy loved it. Over time, it became a cult favorite. In the 90s, he worked with Mel Brooks, a director who knew how to turn any genre into comedy gold. In Robin Hood, Men in Tights, 1993, Schreiber played a tax assessor. The role was small, but his delivery made it unforgettable. 2 years later, he appeared in Dracula, Dead and Loving It, 1995, as a peasant on a coach. It was another quick part, but that never mattered. He knew how to make every moment count. Avery Schreiber spent his life making people laugh, but comedy was only part of his story. He was a husband, a father, and a teacher who cared deeply about the people around him. In 1962, he married Rochelle Isaacs. Their marriage lasted for over 40 years until his passing in 2002. They had 2 children, Jenny and Joshua, and Avery always made time for them. Even when his career took off in the 1970s, he never let work pull him away from home. He was part of the comedy duo Burns and Schreiber, performing on television and in nightclubs. But family came first. That balance wasn't always easy, yet he made it a priority. His home life wasn't separate from his comedy, it was part of it. The laughter and warmth he shared with his family shaped the humor he brought to the stage. Rochelle was more than just his wife. She was his partner in every sense. She stood by him through the unpredictable world of show business, offering support when things were tough and celebrating when things went well. Their home was a place filled with creativity and laughter, where their children grew up surrounded by stories and humor. In addition to his family life, Avery was also known for his health struggles later in life. In 1994, he suffered a heart attack, which was complicated by his diabetes. Although he underwent triple bypass surgery, he never fully recovered from the health setback. Despite these challenges, Avery remained committed to his family and continued to be involved in their lives until his passing on January 7, 2002, at the age of 66. Beyond his performances, Avery left a lasting impact as a teacher. Improvisational theater wasn't just something he did, it was something he believed in. He joined Second City in 1961, a theater group known for shaping modern comedy. It was a place where actors learned to think on their feet, trust their instincts, and work as a team. Avery became one of its most respected teachers, passing on those lessons to the next generation. His teaching was influenced by Viola Spolin, whose book Improvisation for the Theater became a foundation for improv. He believed the best comedy came from being fully present, reacting in the moment, and embracing the unknown. He taught at Second City in both Chicago and Los Angeles, helping students find confidence in themselves and their creativity. He didn't just train comedians, he helped people trust their own ideas and take risks without fear. Avery Schreiber had the talent, the charisma, and the perfect sense of timing to make audiences laugh. But despite his success, he was never given the spotlight in the way some of his peers were. He was a brilliant comedian, yet he remained a character actor, a supporting player rather than the main attraction. Hollywood and television executives had a clear idea of what a star was supposed to be. They wanted leading men who were charming, conventionally attractive, and easy to market. Avery was undeniably talented, but he didn't fit that image. His comedy was larger than life, his expressions exaggerated, his performances built on physicality. He was the kind of actor who stole scenes rather than carried an entire show or film. Because of that, he was cast in supporting roles, guest appearances, and commercials. He had a steady career, but he was rarely the center of attention. Despite never being given the main role, Avery made a lasting impact. He wasn't just a performer, he was a teacher, a mentor, and a guiding force in the world of improvisational comedy. His work with the Second City shaped generations of comedians who came after him. He taught actors to embrace spontaneity, to trust their instincts, and to build comedy through collaboration.